My name is Seraphina, and at 28 I thought I had finally earned my parents' respect. Standing in my empty gala venue, staring at two vacant seats marked reserved for Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell, I realized I had been living a lie my entire life. The $15,000 partnership celebration I had planned for months was supposed to be my moment of triumph. Instead, it became the night I discovered my family's ultimate betrayal and decided to serve justice colder than the untouched champagne on their abandoned table. Before we dive into this family drama that changed everything, I would love to know where you are watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button if you have ever felt overlooked by family, and subscribe because this story has twists that will make you question everything you think you know about blood loyalty. Trust me, what happens next will show you exactly how sweet revenge tastes when served at the perfect temperature. 3 months before that devastating gala night, I had achieved something I had dreamed about since graduating business school. My sustainable fashion startup, Eco Thread Collective, had just secured a partnership with one of the biggest retail chains on the West Coast. After 4 years of 18-hour days, maxed out credit cards, and sleeping on my office couch more nights than I cared to admit, I was finally about to prove that my unconventional path had been worth every sacrifice. The partnership announcement was scheduled for November 15th, and I wanted to celebrate properly. Not just for me, but for everyone who had believed in my vision when others called it naive idealism. I booked the Grand Meridian Ballroom downtown, the same venue where my parents had hosted their anniversary parties for the past decade. The irony was not lost on me. For once, I would be the one hosting something worthy of their social circle. I spent weeks crafting the perfect guest list. Environmental advocates, fellow entrepreneurs, my incredible team who had worked for equity instead of proper salaries, and of course my family. My parents, Robert and Catherine Blackwell, owned 3 luxury car dealerships and had always made it crystal clear that they considered my business venture a phase I would eventually outgrow. My younger brother Marcus, the golden child who followed the family blueprint by joining their business straight out of college, had been more supportive but still carried that subtle air of superiority that came with parental approval. The invitations went out 6 weeks in advance, hand-delivered to my parents' house by courier, because Catherine always said that proper events required proper presentation. The invitation was beautiful recycled paper with gold foil accents, explaining that this celebration would honor the partnership that would allow Eco Thread Collective to reach millions of customers while maintaining our commitment to ethical manufacturing. My mother called the next day. "Seraphina, darling, this is wonderful news. Of course, we will be there. Your father is already excited to see what you have accomplished." Her voice carried that particular tone she used when she was trying to be supportive, but could not quite hide her surprise that I had actually succeeded at something. For the next month, every family dinner included updates about the gala. I told them about the sustainable catering menu, the zero-waste decorations, the documentary crew that would be filming for a piece about innovative women entrepreneurs. My father even offered to help with the guest list, suggesting some of his business contacts who might be interested in sustainable investments. For the first time in years, I felt like they were truly proud of me. The guest list grew to 150 people. The cost climbed to $15,000, every penny I had saved from our first quarter profits, but it felt worth it. This was not just a party. It was my declaration that I belonged in their world while staying true to my values. 2 weeks before the event, I was finalizing seating arrangements when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Mom and Dad seem really excited about your event. Dad has been bragging about you to his golf buddies." The message made my heart swell. Finally, they were seeing me as more than their disappointing daughter who had rejected their practical advice. I placed their reserved seats at the head table right next to mine. I wanted them close when I gave my speech, when I thanked everyone who had supported my journey. I had even written a special section, acknowledging how their lessons about perseverance and business acumen had shaped my approach, even if they had not always understood my methods. The morning of November 15th dawned crisp and clear. I arrived at the venue at 8 in the morning to oversee setup. The ballroom looked stunning, fairy lights made from solar panels, centerpieces of locally grown flowers in repurposed glass containers, elegant signage printed on sustainable materials. By afternoon, Everything was perfect. At 4 o'clock, I called my parents to confirm their arrival time. The gala started at 7, with cocktails beginning at 6:30. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried again an hour later. Same result. By 6:15, I was standing in my emerald green dress, the one I had spent 2 months designing and having made by one of our partner seamstresses, watching guests arrive through the ballroom windows. Environmental activists, local politicians, investors, journalists, my entire team looking prouder than I had ever seen them. But no parents. No brother. At 6:45, my phone finally rang. Catherine's voice was bright and cheerful, completely at odds with the growing pit in my stomach. "Seraphina, sweetheart, I am so sorry, but we are not going to be able to make it tonight." The ballroom noise faded to a dull hum. "What do you mean you cannot make it? This is the most important night of my career." "Well, you see, the Hendersons invited us to their yacht for a sunset cruise, and your father really wants to discuss a potential business opportunity with David Henderson. You understand how these things work, darling. Business comes first. Business comes first." The words my father had drilled into me since childhood now being used to justify abandoning my business triumph for someone else's networking opportunity. "This is my business, Mom. This is the partnership I have been working toward for 4 years. Of course, dear, and we are so proud of you. But this Henderson opportunity could be huge for the dealerships. We will celebrate with you next weekend, I promise." The line went dead. I stood there, holding my phone, watching my guests mingle and laugh, completely unaware that my heart had just shattered into 1,000 pieces. The irony was devastating. They had taught me that business came first, but apparently my business did not qualify. That was the moment I realized I had been fooling myself. All those encouraging comments, all that apparent pride, it had been performative. When faced with choosing between my success and their social climbing, they had chosen exactly what I should have expected. I walked back into that ballroom with my head held high, smiled at every guest, gave the speech I had practiced in the mirror for weeks. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The little girl who had spent decades desperately seeking parental approval died that night, replaced by a woman who finally understood that some people will never see your worth, no matter how high you climb. What I did not know yet was that their absence was about to become the least of my problems. The gala was a triumph, despite my parents' absence. The partnership announcement received standing ovations, 3 investors approached me about expansion opportunities, and the documentary crew captured enough footage to create a compelling piece about sustainable business innovation. I smiled, networked, and played the perfect host, while my heart felt like it had been run through a paper shredder. When the last guest left at midnight, I sat alone in that beautiful ballroom, surrounded by the remnants of my celebration. The catering staff was quietly cleaning up, and I found myself staring at the 2 empty chairs that had been reserved for my parents. The place cards still sat there untouched, Mr. Robert Blackwell and Mrs. Catherine Blackwell, mocking me with their elegant calligraphy. I drove home in silence, still wearing my emerald dress, still carrying the weight of their rejection. But somewhere between the venue and my apartment, the hurt began transforming into something sharper, cleaner. Anger, yes, but not the messy emotional kind. This was calculating, methodical fury, the kind that demanded action rather than tears. Over the next few days, I threw myself into work while my mind processed what had happened. My team was buzzing with excitement about the new partnership, completely unaware of the family drama that had unfolded behind the scenes. I let them believe it had been a perfect evening. There was no point in poisoning their joy with my personal disappointment. But the disappointment refused to stay personal. 3 days after the gala, Marcus called with news that made everything infinitely worse. "Seraphina, I have some updates about the Henderson yacht thing," he said, his voice carrying an odd mixture of excitement and guilt. Turns out it was not just about Dad's business opportunity. I was reviewing quarterly projections, trying to focus on the future instead of dwelling on the past. "What do you mean?" "Well, David Henderson has a son, Trevor, who just moved back from London. Apparently, he is looking to invest in American businesses, particularly in the fashion industry. Mom and Dad spent the entire evening basically pitching him on EcoThread Collective." The spreadsheet on my laptop screen blurred as the implications hit me. They pitched my business to an investor. Without me, they thought they were helping. They had all these details about your partnership, your growth projections, even some of the financial information you shared at family dinners. Trevor was really interested. My hands began shaking. Not with hurt this time, but with rage so pure it felt like electricity coursing through my veins. Marcus, please tell me you are joking. I am not joking. Dad said, Trevor wants to meet with you next week about a potential investment. He thinks it could be huge for your company. I set the phone down and walked to my apartment window, looking out at the city skyline, while my world rearranged itself completely. They had not just abandoned my celebration, they had stolen it. They had taken my achievement, my carefully prepared presentation, my triumph, and turned it into their networking opportunity. They had presented themselves as the conduits to my success, positioning themselves as the bridge between their well-connected friend and their entrepreneur daughter. The cruelest part was that they probably genuinely believed they were helping. In their minds, they had leveraged their absence into a business opportunity that would benefit everyone. They had no understanding of what they had actually done, stolen my agency, my voice, my right to represent my own company on my own terms. When I picked up the phone, my voice was perfectly calm. Marcus, I need you to do something for me. I need you to get me Trevor Henderson's contact information. Sure, I think Dad has his card somewhere. Are you excited about the potential investment? Absolutely thrilled, I said, and for the first time since the gala I was telling the complete truth. That evening, I did something I had never done before. I researched my own parents, not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. I needed to understand exactly who I was dealing with, what they valued, what they feared, and most importantly, what would hurt them most. The internet revealed a treasure trove of information. Social media posts from their various charity events and business functions, newspaper mentions from Chamber of Commerce activities, even a few interviews my father had given to local business publications. I studied their public persona like a detective building a case. What I found was fascinating and infuriating. They were deeply invested in their reputation as successful, connected business leaders. My father served on the boards of 3 different organizations. My mother chaired the annual charity auction for the Children's Hospital. They hosted quarterly networking events at their home. Their entire social structure was built on being seen as influential, generous pillars of the business community. I also discovered something I had not known. They had been telling people about my business success for months. Social media posts about their entrepreneur daughter, casual mentions in interviews about how proud they were of my innovative approach to sustainable fashion. They had been using my achievements as social capital, enhancing their own reputation as parents who had raised a successful, socially conscious daughter. The realization was like a physical blow. They had been monetizing my success socially, while simultaneously treating it as secondary to their other priorities. I was a prop in their public narrative, while being an afterthought in their private choices. That night I crafted an email to Trevor Henderson. It was professional, warm, and carefully designed to accomplish several goals simultaneously. I thanked him for his interest in EcoThread Collective, expressed genuine enthusiasm about potential collaboration, and subtly made it clear that any future business discussions would go directly through me rather than through intermediaries. But more importantly, I began planning something much more comprehensive. If my parents wanted to use my success as part of their social capital, I was going to make sure they understood the full implications of that choice. If they wanted to position themselves as connected business leaders who could broker important relationships, they were going to learn what happened when those relationships became more complicated than they anticipated. I spent the weekend developing what I privately called the Henderson strategy. It was not about revenge in the traditional sense, it was about education. My parents needed to learn that treating their daughter's business as their networking tool came with consequences they had not considered. Trevor Henderson was about to become my unwitting ally in teaching them that lesson. Trevor Henderson turned out to be everything my parents had promised, and nothing like what I had expected. When we met for coffee, the following Tuesday, I discovered a sharp, thoughtful investor who had done his homework about sustainable fashion before our conversation began. He was genuinely interested in EcoThread Collective's mission, asked intelligent questions about our supply chain, and had clearly researched our partnership announcement thoroughly. What he had not done was rely solely on my parents' secondhand information. I have to admit, he said about 20 minutes into our conversation. When your parents described your company at the yacht party, I was intrigued, but I always prefer to hear directly from the founder. Your actual vision is much more sophisticated than their summary suggested. I smiled politely while internally noting that my parents had apparently given him a simplified, probably condescending version of my 4-year business plan. What exactly did they tell you about our approach? Trevor pulled out his phone and scrolled through some notes. They focused mainly on the feel-good environmental aspects and the partnership with the retail chain. They seemed to think the appeal was primarily to consumers who want to feel better about their purchases. But from what you are telling me, this is actually a comprehensive restructuring of how fashion supply chains can operate profitably while maintaining ethical standards. Every word confirmed what I had suspected. My parents understood my business only superficially and had presented it as a lifestyle brand rather than the innovative system I had actually built. They had reduced 4 years of complex work into a simple narrative that would appeal to their social circle. That sounds about right, I said carefully. My parents are very supportive, but they come from a traditional retail background. The sustainability integration aspects are probably outside their expertise. Trevor nodded thoughtfully. I could tell they were proud, but maybe not entirely clear on the technical innovations. That is why I wanted to meet with you directly. The real opportunity here is much bigger than they described. As our conversation continued, I realized that Trevor was not just a potentially valuable investor, he was also going to be the perfect tool for my parents' education. He was sophisticated enough to recognize quality work, connected enough to matter in their social circles, and interested enough in genuine innovation to appreciate being included in authentic business discussions rather than secondhand networking pitches. After our meeting, I began implementing phase 1 of the Henderson strategy. I invited Trevor to visit our production facility, meet our design team, and see our supply chain partnerships in action. I treated him like a serious investor deserved to be treated, with full transparency, detailed analysis, and respect for his intelligence. Meanwhile, I started what I privately called information archaeology on my parents' business network. I researched every person they had mentioned over the past year, every business relationship they had cultivated, every social connection they valued. I was not looking for dirt or scandal. I was looking for patterns, preferences, and pressure points. What I discovered was that my parents' entire social strategy revolved around being connectors. They were not the wealthiest people in their circle, nor the most influential in traditional terms, but they had built their reputation on knowing the right people and facilitating the right introductions. They were social brokers, and their currency was access. This revelation crystallized my strategy. If they wanted to use my business success as part of their social capital, they needed to understand that business relationships require ongoing maintenance, authentic engagement, and mutual respect. They were about to learn that you cannot monetize someone else's work without doing your own homework. The opportunity came sooner than I had expected. 2 weeks after my coffee with Trevor, my mother called with barely contained excitement. Seraphina, darling, we are hosting a dinner party next Friday for some business associates, and Trevor Henderson asked specifically if you would be there. Apparently, his meeting with you went very well. I could practically hear her mentally calculating the social points she would earn by having successfully connected a promising investor with her entrepreneur daughter. That sounds lovely, Mom. Who else will be attending? She rattled off a list of names I recognized from my research. The Hendersons' 2 city council members, the president of the Chamber of Commerce, a prominent local attorney, and several other business leaders whose good opinion my parents clearly valued. We thought it would be wonderful for you to have the chance to network with this group. Your father thinks some of them might be interested in sustainable investing after hearing about your success. There it was again, my success being repackaged as their networking tool. But this time, I was ready. I would love to attend, I said. Actually, I have some exciting updates about the Henderson investment discussions that I think the group would find interesting. Over the next week, I prepared for that dinner party like a general planning a campaign. I coordinated with Trevor to ensure our stories were aligned, prepared materials about Eco-Thread Collective that demonstrated the sophistication of our approach, and most importantly, I reached out to 3 of the other attendees independently. The city council members were particularly interested in sustainable business initiatives, it turned out. When I contacted them directly to discuss potential municipal partnerships, they were enthusiastic about meeting with someone who was implementing environmental solutions at scale. The Chamber of Commerce president was equally intrigued by my innovative approach to ethical manufacturing. By the time Friday evening arrived, I had established independent relationships with half the dinner party guest list. Not through my parents' introductions, but through my own professional outreach. They knew me as Seraphina Mitchell, founder of EcoThread Collective, not as the Blackwell's daughter who had an interesting hobby business. I arrived at my parents' house, wearing a navy blue dress I had designed myself, carrying a leather portfolio, and accompanied by Trevor Henderson. I had invited him to drive with me so we could discuss business before the dinner and present a united front about our investment conversations. The look on my parents' faces when Trevor and I walked in together was priceless. They had expected to be the gracious hosts, introducing their successful daughter to their impressive friend. Instead, they found themselves greeting two business associates who had clearly developed their own relationship. "Trevor, wonderful to see you again," my father said, slightly off balance. "And Seraphina, you look lovely. We are so excited to have you both here." "Thank you for hosting," I replied smoothly. "Trevor and I have been having fascinating discussions about sustainable supply chain innovations. I think tonight's group will really appreciate some of the developments we have been exploring." As the evening progressed, I watched my parents realize that they were no longer the brokers of this relationship. The other guests were asking me detailed questions about business strategies, seeking my opinions on policy initiatives, and treating me as a peer rather than as someone's accomplished daughter. Trevor and I tag-teamed presentations about investment opportunities in sustainable manufacturing, discussing technical details that my parents clearly did not understand. But the real turning point came when the Chamber of Commerce president mentioned that they had been looking for innovative local businesses to feature in their quarterly publication. "Seraphina's company would be perfect," he said, "especially with the Henderson investment backing. This kind of forward-thinking partnership is exactly what we want to highlight." My mother's smile became slightly strained. "Henderson investment," Trevor looked surprised. "Oh, I assumed you knew. Seraphina and I have been finalizing terms for a significant investment in EcoThread Collective's expansion. The due diligence process has been incredibly impressive. She has built something truly innovative." The silence that followed was spectacular. My parents had orchestrated this dinner party, expecting to bask in reflected glory to be celebrated as the connectors who had facilitated an important business relationship. Instead, they found themselves learning about major developments in their daughter's career from other guests at their own table. Have you ever watched someone realize they have been outmaneuvered? It is a fascinating psychological moment. The exact instant when they understand that the game has changed and they are no longer controlling the rules. That was the moment my parents experienced that Friday night, and it was beautiful to witness. But this was only the beginning. Phase 1 had been about establishing my independence and demonstrating my competence. Phase 2 would be about making them understand the real cost of treating my achievements as their social accessories. The main course had not even been served yet. The dinner party continued with an undercurrent of tension that only my parents and I could fully appreciate. While the other guests engaged in animated discussions about sustainable business practices and municipal partnerships, I could see my mother's practiced social smile becoming increasingly brittle with each revelation about developments in my career that she was learning secondhand. The breaking point came during dessert when Trevor casually mentioned something that made my father's wine glass pause halfway to his lips. "Seraphina, have you had a chance to review the community impact proposal for the new manufacturing facility?" The city planning committee seemed very enthusiastic when we presented it last week. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. New manufacturing facility. I had been waiting for this moment for weeks. Oh, did I not mention it? The Henderson investment is allowing us to expand production significantly. We are building a new facility that will create about 200 local jobs while maintaining our zero-waste manufacturing standards. Trevor and I have been working with the City Council to ensure it aligns with their economic development goals. The Chamber of Commerce president leaned forward with interest. This sounds like exactly the kind of project our business development incentive program was designed to support. When are you planning to break ground? Early next year, assuming the final permits come through as expected, Trevor replied. The environmental impact assessments have all come back positive, and the job creation numbers exceeded what we initially projected. I watched my parents exchange a look across the table that I recognized from childhood, the silent communication that happened when they realized they had completely misunderstood a situation that was unfolding right in front of them. They had thought they were hosting a dinner party to show off their successful daughter and their valuable connections. Instead, they were discovering that major decisions about my company's future were being made without their knowledge or input. After dessert, when the conversation moved to the living room for coffee and Brandy, the city council member who specialized in economic development, pulled me aside. Seraphina, I hope you will not mind me saying this, but I am impressed by how thoroughly you have thought through the community integration aspects of your expansion. Many entrepreneurs focus solely on the business metrics and treat local impact as an afterthought. Thank you, I replied. Community partnership has always been central to our mission. Sustainable business practices have to include sustainable community relationships. Your parents must be incredibly proud, not just of your success, but of how thoughtfully you have approached growth. I glanced across the room where my mother was making forced conversation with the attorney's wife while obviously straining to overhear my discussion. They have certainly been interested in my progress. What the council member did not know was that my parents had missed every major milestone leading up to this expansion. The initial site surveys, the environmental impact planning, the community meetings with neighborhood groups, the permit applications, all of it had happened while they were focused on their yacht parties and golf tournaments and networking. Events that did not include their daughter's actual business. The evening's final revelation came when Trevor's phone buzzed with what he described as an urgent message. After reading it, he looked up with an expression of surprised delight. Seraphina, I hope you will forgive the interruption, but I just received confirmation that the Sustainable Fashion Consortium in Copenhagen wants to invite Eco-Thread Collective as a founding member. This is incredibly prestigious. They only extend membership to companies that meet their highest standards for innovation and ethical practices. The room fell silent. Even I had not expected this news tonight, though Trevor and I had been discussing the consortium application for weeks. Copenhagen, my father asked weakly. The European Sustainable Fashion Alliance, I explained, trying to keep my voice casual despite the magnitude of what Trevor had just announced. It is a collaborative network of the most innovative, sustainable fashion companies globally. Founding membership would give us access to European markets, shared research and development resources, and recognition as a leader in sustainable manufacturing innovation. The attorney's wife, who had been quietly listening to our conversation, suddenly became very interested. My daughter works in international business law in New York. She has mentioned this consortium. Apparently, it is extremely difficult to gain membership. The due diligence process is exhaustive. Trevor nodded enthusiastically. We submitted our application 6 months ago. The review process included site visits, supply chain audits, financial analysis, and extensive interviews with our team members. Seraphina's company exceeded their standards in every category. 6 months ago, I could see my parents doing the mental math, realizing that this application process had been happening entirely outside their awareness. 6 months of international business development, of proving our company's worth to European standards, of building relationships that would transform our global reach, and they had known nothing about it. My mother's hostess training kicked in as she tried to process this information while maintaining social grace. How wonderful, darling. When would this membership begin? The formal announcement is next month, I replied. But we have already started collaborating with their research division on new sustainable fiber technologies. Trevor's investment is partly contingent on our European expansion plan. The words hung in the air like an indictment. Every major development in my company's trajectory over the past 6 months had been building toward this moment, and my parents had been spectators to their daughter's international business success. They had treated my gala invitation like a casual social obligation while I was building partnerships that would establish my company as a global leader in sustainable fashion. As the evening wound down and guests began saying their goodbyes, I could see my parents struggling to maintain their composure. They had hosted this dinner party expecting to be celebrated as connected business leaders who had facilitated important relationships. Instead, they had discovered that their daughter had been building an international business empire while they were focused on their local social climbing. The Chamber of Commerce president shook my hand warmly as he prepared to leave. Seraphina, I hope you will consider speaking at our quarterly business luncheon next month. Our members would benefit enormously from hearing about your approach to sustainable growth and international partnership development. I would be honored, I replied, knowing that my parents had been trying to secure speaking invitations at these luncheons for years. After the last guest left, the three of us stood in the suddenly quiet living room, surrounded by empty coffee cups and the remnants of an evening that had revealed far more than anyone had intended. My father cleared his throat. Seraphina, I feel like there have been some significant developments in your business that we have not discussed as a family. I smiled with what I hoped looked like genuine warmth. Oh, there have been lots of exciting developments. But you always taught me that business comes first, remember? I did not want to burden you with details while you were focusing on your own opportunities. The silence that followed was profound. They finally understood that their own words, their own priorities, their own choices had created this distance. They had taught me that business success justified missing family obligations, and I had learned that lesson perfectly. The week following the dinner party was a masterclass in watching carefully constructed social facades crumble under the weight of unacknowledged reality. My parents, who had spent decades building their reputation as connected business leaders with their finger on the pulse of local commerce, suddenly found themselves completely out of touch with the most significant business development happening in their own family. The first crack appeared on Monday morning when my father called me at 7:30 clearly, having spent the weekend processing what he had learned at his own dinner table. Seraphina, I think we need to have a conversation about your business trajectory. There seem to be some major developments that we should discuss as a family. I was in my office reviewing production schedules for the European market launch, surrounded by fabric samples and prototype designs that represented months of work he knew nothing about. Of course, Dad. What did you want to discuss? Well, this Copenhagen Consortium membership, for instance. That seems like the kind of opportunity that would benefit from family input before you committed to international expansion. The presumption in his voice was breathtaking. After missing every milestone in my company's development, after treating my greatest professional achievement like a social inconvenience, he wanted to insert himself into business decisions that had been finalized months ago. The application process was quite involved, I said carefully. Trevor and I spent considerable time developing our international strategy. I would hate to have burdened you with technical details while you were managing your own business priorities. Seraphina, you are being deliberately obtuse. This affects the entire family. If you are expanding internationally, there are tax implications, legal considerations, risk assessments that require experienced guidance. I set down my coffee and took a deep breath. You are absolutely right, Dad. International expansion does require experienced guidance. That is why I hired the international business law firm that specializes in European market entry, worked with tax consultants who understand cross-border manufacturing operations, and spent 6 months in due diligence with investors who have successful track records in sustainable business development. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, he spoke again, his voice carrying a note I had never heard before, uncertainty mixed with something that might have been respect. You hired specialists, multiple teams of specialists actually. The European market has very different regulatory requirements than domestic operations. I needed people who understood sustainable manufacturing, compliance, international labor standards, cross-border shipping, logistics, and European consumer protection laws. That must have been expensive. It was a significant investment. But Trevor's funding made it possible to do things properly rather than cutting corners. What I did not say was that every decision had been made without consulting the business mentors who had raised me, because those mentors had demonstrated that my business was not their priority when it mattered most. The conversation ended awkwardly with my father, promising to circle back about family involvement in my expansion plans. I hung up knowing that circle would never close, because there was no role for people who had opted out of the journey to insert themselves into the destination. But the real earthquake came on Wednesday when my mother made a discovery that changed everything. She called me at 2 in the afternoon, her voice tight with an emotion I could not immediately identify. "Seraphina, I just had lunch with Patricia Hennessy from the Children's Hospital Board. She mentioned something very interesting." Patricia Hennessy was one of the most well-connected socialites in our city, the kind of woman whose opinion could make or break reputations in our parents' social circle. Whatever she had mentioned was clearly significant. What did Patricia have to say? She said that Trevor Henderson had been telling people at the country club about his investment in your company. "Apparently, he has been quite complimentary about your business acumen and international vision." I waited for the other shoe to drop because my mother's voice suggested there was more to this story. "But Seraphina, here is what I do not understand. Patricia said Trevor mentioned that he was impressed by how independently you had developed your business strategy. He apparently told the Henderson family that you had succeeded without family financial support or business connections, which made your achievements even more remarkable. The implication hung between us like a loaded gun. Trevor had been praising me specifically for building my business without family help, which meant he had no idea that my parents considered themselves contributors to my success. In his mind, and apparently in his conversations with their social circle, I was a self-made entrepreneur whose family had been supportive but uninvolved. "That does sound like something Trevor would say," I replied carefully. "Seraphina, did you tell him that we were not involved in your business development?" This was the moment I had been waiting for without realizing it. The moment when my parents would be forced to confront the reality of their own choices. "Mom, what exactly did you want me to tell him?" "That you missed my partnership celebration to attend a yacht party, that you learned about my international expansion from dinner party conversation, that you found out about my largest investment deal from other guests at your own table." The silence that followed was deafening. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. "We thought we were being supportive. You were being supportive in the way that felt comfortable for you. But support that disappears when it competes with your other priorities is not actually support. It is conditional approval. That is not fair. Mom, you taught me that business comes first. You and Dad have said that phrase to me hundreds of times over the years. When it was your business, your networking, your opportunities, business came first. When it was my business, my networking, my opportunities, apparently your business still came first." The conversation ended with my mother hanging up without saying goodbye, and I knew that something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. They had finally understood that their treatment of my success had consequences they had not anticipated. But the full scope of those consequences became clear on Friday when my father received a call that shattered his illusion of social standing completely. David Henderson, Trevor's father and my parents' yacht party host, called to congratulate him on raising such an impressive daughter. But the conversation did not go the way my father expected. According to Marcus, who called me immediately afterward in a state of shock, David Henderson had been under the impression that my parents were humble, supportive parents who had deliberately stayed in the background while their daughter built an international business empire. He praised their parenting philosophy and their wisdom in allowing me to develop independence and resilience. My father, caught completely off guard, had tried to take credit for my business education and strategic thinking. David Henderson had listened politely, then mentioned that Trevor had been particularly impressed by how I had navigated complex international negotiations without family connections or business network support. The conversation had ended with David Henderson expressing confusion about my father's sudden claim of involvement in my business development, since Trevor had been clear that my success was particularly remarkable because I had achieved it independently. My parents had been exposed as the superficial supporters they actually were by their own friend, based on information provided by their daughter's business partner. The social capital they had tried to extract from my success had evaporated, replaced by questions about their actual role in my achievements. The collapse was complete. 6 months later, I stood in the Copenhagen headquarters of the European Sustainable Fashion Alliance, signing the founding membership agreement that would establish EcoThread Collective as a leader in global sustainable manufacturing. Trevor was beside me, along with our new European Operations Director and the legal team that had guided us through the complex international expansion process. The irony was not lost on me that I was achieving the international business success my parents had always claimed to want for their children, but I was doing it surrounded by people who had earned their place in my journey rather than people who expected it by birthright. The months following the dinner party revelation had been transformative in ways I could never have anticipated. Once the initial shock wore off, my parents had attempted several different strategies for reinserting themselves into my business narrative. They tried claiming credit for my independence and resilience, suggesting that their tough love approach had prepared me for entrepreneurial success. They tried positioning themselves as behind-the-scenes advisors whose guidance had shaped my strategic thinking. They even tried suggesting that their absence from my gala had been a deliberate test of my ability to succeed without them. None of these revisionist histories gained traction primarily because the business community had already formed their own opinions about my capabilities based on direct observation rather than family mythology. The Copenhagen membership announcement had been covered in 3 different business publications, all of which focused on EcoThread Collective's innovative approach to sustainable manufacturing and ethical supply chain management. The articles mentioned my background and education, but not once did they reference my family's business connections or suggest that my success was anything other than the result of my own vision and execution. Trevor's investment had grown into a comprehensive partnership that extended far beyond financial backing. He had introduced me to a network of international investors and business leaders who valued innovation and results over social connections and inherited relationships. These were people who evaluated opportunities based on merit rather than networking potential. But the most significant transformation had been in my relationship with my team. Without the distraction of seeking family approval, I had been able to focus entirely on building the kind of company culture that reflected my actual values rather than trying to prove my worth to people who measured success by different standards. My assistant director, Maria, who had been with me since the early days when we were operating out of a shared workspace and paying ourselves in equity rather than salary, had become my closest advisor and friend. She had watched my parents' behavior over the years with the clear-eyed perspective of someone who was not emotionally invested in maintaining family mythology. "You know what the best part of this whole European expansion is," she said as we celebrated the Copenhagen signing at a small restaurant near the Alliance headquarters. "You did not have to spend any mental energy managing your parents' feelings about your success. You just got to focus on building something amazing." She was right. The past 6 months had been the most creatively productive period of my career, partly because I had stopped trying to translate my achievements into terms that would earn parental approval. I had been free to make decisions based on what was best for the company, the team, and our mission, rather than what would look most impressive at family dinners. Marcus had been the family member most affected by the shift in dynamics. Unlike our parents, he had genuinely supported my business from the beginning, but he had also been caught in the middle of a family conflict he did not entirely understand. Over the months following the dinner party, we had developed a much more honest relationship. "I always knew Mom and Dad did not really get what you were building," he told me during one of our monthly coffee meetings. "But I did not realize how much their approval mattered to you until I watched you stop caring about it. I think I needed to prove to myself that I could succeed without their validation before I could have a healthy relationship with them again," I replied. "If I ever can." The relationship with my parents had settled into a polite but distant pattern. They attended family holidays and remembered important dates, but the easy intimacy that comes from shared understanding and mutual respect had never developed. They had learned to ask about my business rather than assuming they understood it, but they had never quite figured out how to be genuinely supportive rather than performatively proud. The most telling moment had come during my birthday dinner in March, when my father had asked about the European operations with what seemed like genuine interest. But when I began explaining the technical challenges of cross-border sustainable supply chain management, I could see his attention drift toward more familiar territory. That sounds very complex, sweetheart. I am sure you have good people handling the details. It was a kind dismissal, but still a dismissal. He remained fundamentally uninterested in understanding what I actually did, preferring to maintain his impression of me as someone who was successful in ways that were beyond his comprehension rather than someone whose work he could engage with intellectually. My mother had made more effort to bridge the gap, but her attempts were often undermined by her inability to separate my achievements from her own social positioning. She would mention my European expansion to her friends, but frame it in terms of how proud she was rather than what I had actually accomplished. As I packed my bags for the flight back to the States after the Copenhagen signing, I realized that I had finally achieved something I had been seeking for decades. I genuinely did not need their approval anymore. Not because I was angry or hurt, but because I had built a life and career that was fulfilling on its own terms. The plane lifted off from Copenhagen as the sun was setting, and I found myself thinking about the empty chairs at my gala 6 months earlier. Those chairs had represented everything I thought. I wanted family recognition, parental pride, inherited social connections. But their absence had forced me to build something better, authentic relationships based on shared values and mutual respect. Trevor, who was sitting across the aisle reviewing expansion projections, looked up and smiled. Ready to change the world, I smiled back, thinking about the team waiting for us back home. The sustainable manufacturing processes we were pioneering and the international partnerships that would allow us to scale our impact globally. I think we already are. So here's my question for all of you who have made it this far into my family revenge story. Have you ever had to choose between seeking approval from people who do not really see your worth and building relationships with people who genuinely value what you bring to the world? Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is not punishing people for underestimating you. It is building something so meaningful that their opinion becomes irrelevant. If this story resonated with you, especially the parts about family dynamics and finding your chosen family in business partnerships, I would love to hear about your own experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had to distance yourself from family expectations to achieve your real goals? Hit that like button if you believe that sometimes the best response to being undervalued is to go build your own table instead of fighting for a seat at theirs. And please subscribe if you want to hear more stories about family karma, business, justice, and the sweet satisfaction that comes from proving doubters wrong through pure success rather than petty revenge. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, sometimes the most beautiful revenge is building a life so fulfilling that the people who hurt you become footnotes in your success story rather than chapters in your pain.